Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On today's episode, going to be discussing ESPN and Sports Illustrated top 100 players. We kind of comparing it to my own. And then the reason Bleacher Report's not included on here is because as of recording this, they're not done with their list. So we just wanted to get this out and get some reactions on. So Clayton, I guess my first question to you is, do you think that the folks at Sports Illustrated and ESPN are watching basketball at all?
It's arguable that they're not. Um, Mainly, if you read any of their rationales for how they ranked these players, there seems to be no consistency or really any clear criteria. I don't know what they're expecting. I don't know what they're watching. There's definitely a lot of head scratchers.
Yeah, ESPN, they don't have any explanation at the beginning of the top 100 for how they're ranking these players. Like Sports Illustrated, I think there were three or four guys that did the rankings, and they actually did try to explain like how they're ranking players, but it's very vague. They're like we value players who can do multiple things and stuff like that. It was very vague. They didn't really get into it too much. ESPN, I think as a whole, I was like less offended by, with the exception of like a few outliers that I think are just absolutely insane. And then Sports Illustrated, when I was going through and adding it to this Excel sheet, I was like, I kept having to double check and make sure I wasn't looking at last year's list because a few things just seemed kind of out of time and out of order.
Yeah, it seems like when they pick their names, their reasoning was just trust me, and then really nothing else.
Yeah, or the question would be like on the ESPN list, they would question like injuries for players, but then more injury prone players later down the list, they wouldn't even bring up like injury issues. It was very bizarre.
Right. Yeah, it's just not consistent.
Yeah, and I guess I want to just start off like, how talented is the league now? It's just insane. Like putting together this list, when I started going through, I feel like when I got to like the 20 and 30s, it was getting really hard. Guys that I wanted to have higher on the list just kept slipping and slipping and slipping. And when you
Yeah.
see like those articles, like just on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and it's like somebody posted an article with a headline is like, "Oh, so and so is the 25th ranked best player in the league," and your immediate reaction is like, "Well, that can't be right. That seems so low." But then when you go through and you actually do the list, like they are sort of in that range.
Yeah, it seems like a diss for sure for some guys. Like even LeBron, Sports Illustrated has him at 7. And if you would have told me that 2 years ago, I think you're out of your mind. I'm like, who is above him? But like, there's definitely a case for guys above him. And I struggled with at least getting through like 15 through 20 because it just felt wrong to put those guys that low. But the league is just that talented now.
For me, Bam Adebayo was the one as a huge Heat homer. When I saw he was ranked, like I don't remember where ESPN ranked him, but it was way down the list. I'm like, he's a top 15 player in the league. Like he definitely is. And then when I went through and did the list, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
no, he isn't anymore.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is like it, and I've been kind of talking about this during the team previews, is like you may look at your team's roster. The Trailblazers are like the perfect example of this. Like if you look at the 2019 Trailblazers, that team that made the conference finals, like the supporting cast is like Al Farouk Aminu and like Evan Turner, Ennis Cantor, like players that are like okay, I guess. But now the supporting cast is like Jeremy Grant and Josh Hart and a bunch of really good guys. And this year's team, they're going to be fighting for a play-in spot, even though, like, if we just had a time machine and we dropped them in 2019, they're better than that 2019 Blazers
Yeah.
team that made the conference finals.
Yeah, totally.
And we've just had so many good draft classes over the last few years. Like the last real stinker of a draft class I can think of is that one where Anthony Bennett went number one. Even the LaMelo Ball draft, I think going in, we thought that that wasn't going to be a very good one. But there's been a lot of good players who have come out of that class.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the top like 30 of the 3 lists, how many of these guys were drafted in 2017 and sooner?
Yeah,
Um, like it's
it's
crazy how much that's forming the league right now.
right, right. Big reason I think the league needs to expand. I think there's the talent level is just higher than it's ever been, and I think there's room for a couple more teams.
Yeah, I mean that would be awesome. I think let's get one in St. Louis.
I'd prefer Kansas City, but yeah, just in the interest of time, we wanted it to limit it to the top 50. As interesting as discussing Jordan Clarkson versus like Karis LeVert is, I think everyone besides maybe myself has better things to do with their day than listen to a discussion on that. Um, so yeah, I want to start by laying out our criteria for how we evaluate players because ESPN doesn't explain it at all, like we said, and then Sports Illustrated kind of had this like really vague language that didn't really actually explain anything. So, what does like a best player mean to you, or how are you projecting guys as better or worse than one another through a list like this?
I kind of went about it like based based only on last year. What are they in a position to do now? Whether that's how has their team changed around them? How does that give their team a little bit of success? Because I know you didn't gauge team success very heavily, but I think it's part of it. Because what I'm ranking is how good of a season are they going to have based on their current situation, and the team around them is definitely part of it. Um, that being
Yeah,
said, our top 12 players were the same, just in slightly different order. So I don't think we were that far off in terms of criteria.
no, and the way I kind of choose to explain it, I look at it as like, who would I rather have on my team if my goal is to win games? And I don't look at it from just a talent perspective. Like I'm factoring in things like injuries. So like in the example of like Kawhi Leonard, when you're rating him, you have to really rate him as if you're just going to get 50 games, 55 games from him during the regular season because that's all you're really going to get. And then I'm also factoring in like their basketball situation. Like you said, I don't really evaluate necessarily how many games the team is going to win. And what I mean by this is like last year with Julius Randle and the Knicks, like the perfect example, where like Julius Randle, the talent is a much better player than what how the Knicks use him. So if Julius Randle was in my top 50, spoiler alert, he isn't. I would be, and if I was doing this last year, I would have had to evaluate Julius Randle, the point guard, not Julius Randle, the player, because he was basically playing point guard for the Knicks. Um, or say like a player like Magic Johnson. If he was on a team full of scrubs because he kind of relies on his teammates, like he's a guy that needs to distribute the ball a lot. So if he's on a teammate full of scrubs versus like a really good team, you're going to evaluate him lower based on his basketball situation. Score first
Right.
guys don't really have to worry about that. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. Looking more at the basketball situation and how that's going to affect their play, whether they're going to be a winning player in that situation, regardless of the results. I don't want to punish people for being on bad teams unless it actually affects the type of player that they are and what their role is on the team.
Yeah, another thing you mentioned. So I'm assuming a fully healthy season out of all these guys, including Kyrie, which I think is a bold assumption, but
Yeah. I,
that's my underlying. I don't want to assume that you're only getting, the 40 games out of Kyrie that we're probably going to get, or a lot of rest games out of Kawhi. It's just if we get them healthy the entire season, this is what the rankings are going to look like.
I do choose to factor that in just because like it's obviously impossible to actually predict injuries, but I think like there are definitely players that are trending a certain direction. That's why Anthony Davis ended up so low on a lot of people's lists.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's why he's higher on mine because I took that out of it. It seems like he had so much time off to rest and maybe he won't get injured this year, but who knows?
yeah, I mean, I so few guys play like the full game slate now. Like if you're getting 50 games out of a guy, like that's pretty good. Honestly, nowadays, like 60 or 70 is like pretty it puts you up there. So I'm assuming like relative health and like relative to who they are now. I mean, if they've been injured the last 3 years, then obviously that's a different conversation. Like I'm not going to predict that. It's impossible to predict injuries on a guy who's not been injured. But if there's been
Yeah.
injuries the last few years, I can kind of assume that that's going to be more of the norm.
Yeah. And if anything, those three guys are definitely the three that you can predict that on: Kyrie, Kawhi, and Davis.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess let's just start like the honorable mentions, kind of the guys who didn't make the top 50. Was there anything that surprised you? Because I didn't rank those players, but when you were looking at the list for like either Sports Illustrated or ESPN, was there anything that surprised you with either somebody being ranked too high or too low?
I mean, it's Clay you could make an argument for, I think. Um, Nothing I felt super strongly about really. Um, Tyler Hero I thought was kind of low.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that later because
Yeah,
he's in my top 50.
yeah, I figured.
Yeah.
Um, let's see, Bridges fell just out of the top 50 on Sports Illustrated, which I think there's definitely an argument there.
Yeah, he's in my top 50. He was nearly a defensive player of the year last year.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, I
I don't
think he's
see
a
how
stud.
I don't know how he would not be in the top 50. He's been improving every year too. So yeah, I guess my first one, just like that I noticed like towards the back of the list, was D'Angelo Russell. He's at
Oh yeah,
93 on ESPN. And I'm not a huge D'Lo guy by any means. I don't really care for him that much. But like if you look at the guards that are ranked above him, like I don't understand how he's 30 spots worse than Spencer Dinwiddie and Russell Westbrook. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not even sure that I would rather have Dinwiddie or Westbrook over D'Lo.
yeah. Jordan Poole also I'm noticing is he's in the 80s.
Oh yeah, he's in the
That's
80s on Sports Illustrated.
yeah, that's kind of absurd.
Um, yeah, I think with D'Lo though, I think I mean, he's still a really good pick and roll player, decent catch and shoot guy. I just yeah, he's a bit inconsistent, and sometimes he shoots the ball a little more than you'd like. But I think you can do a lot worse than him with at your starting point guard spot.
How do you feel about ranking rookies who haven't played an NBA game? Like Paolo's 82 right now, and there's
Keegan,
probably a couple guys below him that you could argue that should be ranked higher than him, especially with not having seen him.
I don't know. I don't like to do it, but I'm not upset that Paolo is in the 80s.
Yeah,
I think if you're putting Keegan Murray at 95, though, I'd really be interested to hear the case for that because he's on a pretty decent team. I don't know how significant his role is going to be for them, for the Kings, and like as far as like what he can bring to the table, like Jabari Smith Jr. isn't in anyone's top 100. So like, is what you're getting from Keegan Murray like significantly better than what you would be getting from Jabari Smith Jr. as far as like playing winning basketball goes? Like, I don't know that that would be the case. So that's really my only gripe. I'm not really too offended by where they're placed. I think Paolo is going to be really good, and I think he's going to be
yeah.
pretty good right off the bat. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I Paolo could have been at 90. I think if he had been in the 70s, that would have raised my eyebrows a little bit. But yeah, I don't know that Keegan Murray belongs in the top 100 like right off the bat. There's a lot of guys who didn't make the top 100 who I think you would definitely rather have like for one season, not projecting their careers going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's guys like that, especially when it's that low. It's like, all right, well, let's at least see them play first.
Yeah,
And I'm not like frustrated over the Paolo ranking. I think he's probably going to be a top 100 player.
I think
Um,
so too. I mean, he could even be higher than that if things go really well. I think the Magic are going to be a lot better than people are thinking this year. There was some signs down the stretch that they were once they got healthy that they were really figuring it out. They were one of the best defensive teams in the league, like post All Star break. So with another year of development, and I'm going to get to the Magic here. I guess that we can segue that right into the Magic. I think the Orlando Magic hate is just insane on these lists. Franz Wagner was not on ESPN's top 100 list. That is just absolutely insane to me.
yeah,
He was
I'm a
really
huge
good
fan.
last. Yeah, he was really good for them last year, and he's going to be obviously even better this year, entering his second year in the league. So that was crazy to me, especially when you've got guys like. Just as an example, another guy I had an issue with Grant Williams in the
Hmm.
top 100 is absolutely absurd to me.
Yeah.
I'm not even positive he's in the top 200 of players in the league.
Yeah, I wish they would have given like their next 15 picks. We could see who these like bubble guys kind of made it over. Um,
Yeah.
I would love to see that because then if you could really get into the discussion, like, all right, how is this guy possibly over whoever it is who's at like 105 or
So
whatever?
there's 150 starting spots in the league. So they're saying that Grant Williams is absolutely a starting caliber player. 8 points, 4 rebounds a game. Like,
Yeah,
no chance. No chance. He's a starting player in the NBA on
yeah.
like a decent team. No.
I know he started some games last year, but yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. And Wendell Carter Jr., I think, should be on like towards the back half for the Magic. Like he was probably the most underrated player in the league right now, I think, especially because I would have expected to see him in the top 100. He's 15 and 10, still in his early 20s. I don't understand like taking him or taking like Brandon Clark. Mitchell Robinson is like debatable, but then again, like Grant Williams, like I'd much
Yeah.
rather have the 15 and 10 from Wendell Carter than whatever Grant Williams is giving me. And then Sports Illustrated had Robert Covington and Dorian Finney-Smith. I like both of them as role players, but they're not top 100 players.
All right. Yeah, I feel like Covington is his name shows up every year on this list, and I just never agree with that.
He's a good team defender, but he's actually not very good on the ball. As we've kind of seen the last few years, he can kind of get cooked like when he's left on an island on the ball, but like through in a team concept, he's a good defensive player. And yeah, that last playoff run with Portland, like he single-handedly like sunk them in the
Yeah.
elimination game. um, Anthony Simons seemed kind of low to me. I don't know how much higher I would have had him, but I definitely would have had him on the ESPN list, like over Levert, Buddy Hield, and Jordan Clarkson, and then the Sports Illustrated list, I would have definitely had him over Norman Powell.
Harry Rozier, definitely.
Yeah, I think Terry Rozier is a little bit more debatable just for one season, but I would rather have Simons personally and like the upside, but
Yeah.
I would at least be willing to hear a case for Rozier. I think Levert, Hield, and Clarkson in particular, like I don't think there's any chance any of them are better than Simons next season.
Clarkson, maybe. I think Clarkson was very impressive last year.
Maybe I'm a little lower on Clarkson
He's
than I should be, but
it's
yeah.
I'm surprised being a Mizzou guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I probably should view him a little bit more highly, but I just the kind of the gunner, like inefficient shooting, like ball dominant guys, I'm not as keen on, especially like here's another guy I thought should have been on the list somewhere. Gary Trent Jr. Still
Yeah.
pretty young, 18 a game last season and on a fifth seeded Raptors team.
Yeah, he's definitely a stud. I don't know why he's not. I don't even think he's on either of the lists.
No, he's on none of the lists. And then
Yeah, that's crazy.
DeAndre Hunter wasn't on ESPN's, which when you have Grant Williams on it, like I'm just like how are Gary Trent and DeAndre Hunter worse players than Grant Williams? Setting the money aside, if you were to offer any of those players to the Celtics for Grant Williams, they would be like, yes, no question. They wouldn't even think about it.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah. That's about all I had for like the honorable mention guys. I guess let's kick things off here with like the 40 through 50 range. Did you have any issues with any of the lists?
Simmons at 39, I think is bold. Draymond Green being as high as he is, I think is bold. Um, although like Simmons, I wouldn't put him in the 40s. I think he's in a better position with the way his team is, especially if he's going to be playing center this year, which is some of the things that I've heard.
It looks like they're
Um,
sliding him into that like Bruce Brown small five role, and they don't really have much centers. Like it's basically Claxton and Sharp. So like they kind of have to play him at center out of almost necessity.
yeah, and I don't hate that for him. It takes a ton of offensive pressure off of him that everyone is grilling him for, myself included. I think Darius Garland is way too low in these lists, the low 40s.
Yeah, yeah, Garland being in the low 40s is absolutely insane to me. He's like he was like 20-8 last year or something somewhere in that
Yeah,
range, all-star. Um and still really young. And last year he was kind of cast as almost the Trey Young of the Cavs. Like they didn't have a lot of other shot creation other than what like Evan Mobley could kind of cobble together early in his career. And he's still really early on in that process. I think eventually Mobley gets to a place where he can kind of create shots for himself and others. But right, as a rookie, he just wasn't ready to do that for a team that was fighting for a playoff spot. So they kind of left everything on Garland. So now that they have Mitchell, he won't have to do that as much, and he can
right.
kind of slide back into that pass first point guard role that he kind of is better suited for. So yeah, I have him a lot higher. I would really be interested to hear Sports Illustrated lay out the case for De'Aaron Fox over Darius Garland.
Yeah, I think they probably just dropped him because of the addition of Mitchell. They probably just are assuming production is going to be lower,
They're
which I
thinking
can argue against. Like efficiently, you're probably going to be better with another shot creator on the
you
team.
could tell he wasn't real comfortable with having to do kind of everything for them. Like he wants to kind of move the ball. He's a very willing passer. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that his maybe not his scoring numbers, but I think his assist numbers are going to be up. I wouldn't be totally shocked to see him win the assist title this year. And like I think there will be less cannibalism like between him and Mitchell for like touches and scoring. I think they're going to. I think there'll be some growing pains at first, but I think they'll figure it out. I think they actually really gel well together.
Yeah, and they both seem, at least on the social media side, they both seem pumped about it. So
Yeah,
there's definitely teams where you can see that already in the preseason that they're not pumped about their new teammates.
yeah, yeah.
Not adding the Lakers or anything, but
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. How do you feel about Russell Westbrook? He was a lot higher on list than I thought he would be. And like, if you're just looking at his talent, like, yeah, I think he's still a top 100 player. But
yeah,
like, given the situation he's kind of in, and if your goal is to win basketball games, I don't know that he is anymore.
yeah, and I don't think it's a good situation for him to be on that team. I don't think
No,
the second he got traded to the Lakers, it was a bad situation for him and everyone around him. And then
now
add
it's
Patrick Beverly that.
yeah. I suggested last year, like early in the year, I'm like, well, they should just go out of their way to make Westbrook as miserable as possible to like so that he will be enticed to not take the player option. They were like a little bit too late on that when adding Patrick Beverly to the team. Did you see the
Yeah,
clip the other night of like Beverly was calling for a huddle? And
yeah.
also Westbrook just told him to kick rocks, basically, just didn't join the huddle. It's so funny.
Yeah. So yeah, this season should be good for them.
Yeah. You mentioned Draymond. I didn't have him in the top 50. I think this has to be like the Warriors' recency bias. I didn't even deduct points or like ranking from Draymond for trying to give Jordan Poole a concussion. He just wasn't very good in the finals for the most part. And like at his age and all the injuries he's kind of starting to pile up, I don't know.
I
And
mean,
then there's also like, is he going to overextend himself um, to try and like really push for that next contract?
yeah, my thing with Draymond is if you stick him on any other team, he's not going to be as paid as he has been in the last couple of years. He won't be seen as highly as he was in the last couple of years. If you just solidify it to Draymond, I don't think he's a top 50 player.
Yeah, but then that's when you got to factor in his basketball situation. But I agree
Yeah,
with you. Like a lot of people who argue against Steph say that Draymond is like a big reason for Steph's success, but I actually think it's the reverse. I think it would be really hard to play a player like Draymond, especially at this stage in his career, if you didn't have a player like Steph.
yeah, and don't get me wrong, Draymond plays that role incredibly well. I think there's definitely a feed off each other factor to it, but I mean, when it's Steph Curry who you're doing it with, it makes things a lot easier.
He's still like as good defensively as he's ever been. Like he's still really potent defensively, but you almost get a negative offensively. It's not even that you get nothing. It's like he's outside of a few crafty passes here and there. He's pretty bad defensively. I mean, I'm sorry, offensively.
Yeah, it's certainly not impressive. I would take his defense over a lot of guys for sure. He's definitely impressive there still for his age and lingering injuries. But there's just definitely a lot of guys I'd put over him.
Yeah, and then when you start like looking at the names who are above him, it's like not shocking. But like on ESPN's list here, you've got Tyrese Maxey below Draymond Green.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Halliburton on the Sports Illustrated list sticks out to me
as being too high.
as being below Draymond Green.
Oh, yeah, they had Sports Illustrated was really high on Draymond Green. I even
Yeah,
think like LaMelo, like Evan Mobley, I would say is better than Draymond Green at this stage. Sabonis, like
definitely
you're
Sabonis.
starting
Yeah,
Scotty Barnes. I think DeAndre Ayton is also kind of interesting. Like he just missed out on the top 50 for um, for ESPN, and he's obviously in here at 49 for Sports Illustrated. I think he's a top 50 player, but it seems like he's so unhappy in that Sun situation that if he's not doing the little things, like DeAndre Ayton is the type of player, like if he's not going to run the floor and hustle and rotate on defense, he's not very good. And now that he's unhappy, I just can't see him sacrificing and doing those little things for this Suns team.
yeah. I don't know why they don't just pay him, even if they just want to trade him in the future. Eh, them not wanting to spend 30 million on a guy like DeAndre Ayton, I think is absurd. And yeah, like you said, I don't think he's going to give that effort this year when they treated him that way.
Yeah, well, I guess now they are paying him, and I kind of brought it up in the Suns preview. And like the way they've handled this is just so idiotic. Like they fought over that one extra year on the contract. I don't even think, from what I remember, I don't remember the Suns being upset about the actual salary figure. It's more the number of years. And if like that contract blows up in your face and Aiton is either hurt or he's just terrible, whatever the case, that extra year isn't going to be what makes or breaks you as a franchise. Like it's not going to really drastically affect your ability to move that contract if things go really poorly. And then knowing what we know now about the collective bargaining agreement coming up and like the absurd salaries that some of these guys are going to get in the very near future, that could have very well ended up being a bargain on the back end of that deal. So they basically played this like they did the Joe Johnson situation where they played hardball for something that was really inconsequential as far as like a number of years or a salary figure and pissed the guy off and ruined the team chemistry. It was a big part of what happened to them in the playoffs last year. And I think it's going to be a big cloud looming overhead kind of going forward for them.
Yeah, I think he definitely deserved to be treated well by the franchise. They, for whatever reason, like you mentioned, this are freaking out over 1 year.
Especially after a finals run where they go through, going back to last off season, a finals run where they go through Anthony Davis, where he's the primary defender on him, then he's the primary defender on Jokic, then he's the primary defender on Giannis, and yeah, Giannis dominated him, but like,
Yeah, I mean,
like as the only option, like what did you expect him to do?
right.
And they very easily, like I know that was a 6 game series, but they get a couple different breaks. They could have still won that final series.
Yeah, that was a very entertaining series.
That was. Last thing I really want to mention here from the top 50 is Tyrese Maxey, Tyler Hero, and Jordan Poole. So I don't think that Maxey, from what I remember, is on the SI list. I'm like 90% sure he isn't. He's on the ESPN list at 44. And then Jordan Poole was down in the 80s for Sports Illustrated, and then Tyler Hero and Maxi, who like whatever combination of them, they're all in like the 60s for both of the other lists. I don't see how those three aren't top 50 players, and I don't see any like real meaningful difference between the three and like their potential going forward. They were both three super young players on title contender type teams.
Yeah, I totally disagree with Poole and Hero being so low on the other two lists. I think you definitely have them where they should be in the top 50. Where in that top 50 is another discussion, but I don't see a lot of guys above them on the Sports Illustrated and ESPN list that probably deserve to be.
Yeah, I've been leading the charge on the Tyler Hero defense for like 2 or 3 years now. That he's
Yeah,
like
I mean,
that he's a really good player. So part of it is that like I'm a huge Heat homer, but he like numbers wise, he stacks up with like guys who are way higher up on the list than he is. I know he's a liability defensively, but the narrative surrounding him, like for some reason this year, winning the sixth man of the year all of a sudden became a bad thing. And everybody was like, oh, well, he was just beating up on second units. That's not true. Like he came in really early in games, like he'd come in at like the 8 minute mark or something when like the starters are still out there. And then he's closing games for the Heat. Fourth quarter scoring wise, like his production, points per game, he's right in there with like Luka Doncic, Chris Middleton, and Donovan Mitchell as far as scoring average in the fourth quarter. So I don't know what everyone is seeing with him. Like he with everyone out for the Heat as much as we had for the year, Hero is the guy carrying us through like the December and January portion of the season when we were still winning games.
yeah, there's definitely some disrespect out there. I don't see it either.
And it's the same thing with Poole and Maxi. Like,
Poole
especially
is
in
the most surprising one to me. Like,
he was
how do you
he
justify him in the 80s?
he wasn't very good in the finals. I think that might be the justification, or maybe with Clay coming back, they expect him to take like a diminished role. But yeah, I
Maybe.
don't see that. I mean, I barely think that like at this stage in his career, I'm not expecting the world from Clay Thompson anymore. So Jordan Poole could very well be better than him going forward. And yeah, I don't know. I didn't agree. I thought them not having SI not having Maxi, any
Yeah.
of those three guys in the top 50 was just absolutely insane to me. Maxi was
Yeah.
easily the 76ers second best player last year. And I don't
Oh
think it
yeah,
was
for sure.
particularly close.
I don't think it was either.
Uh,
I think Philly Sixers fans would agree with that too.
in that playoff series where we played the 76ers in the second round, I was way more afraid of Maxi than I was of Harden.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
All right, let's move into the top 40 through 30. Did you have any issues with any of the placements here?
I so I'm looking at Jamal Murray right now. You have him at 39. The other two lists did not have him that high. I think where you had him is probably more accurate. I think he can even go higher. We just don't really know because we haven't seen him in a year and a half.
The reason I don't have him higher, I think having him lower is justifiable. I just couldn't go quite that low with him. From what I hear, he's not fully recovered yet. And so if they're bringing him along slowly and you combine that with some rust having not played basketball in a while, I understand why he's kind of as low as he is.
Yeah, I mean, I like him in the 40 range where you have him. I'm trying to find him on the other list.
I think he's 50 on somebody's list. Yeah, he's
Yeah, he's
50 on
50.
on ESPN's. And I don't even think he's on the Sports Illustrated list
I don't think
for
he
the
is
top
either.
50. Yeah,
Yeah.
that seems a little crazy to me. I mean,
I mean,
I know it's a
he's
pretty,
a stud. We just haven't seen him in a while, and
yeah,
the
I know
ACL is always you never know what you're going to get after that.
it's a pretty serious injury. Less serious than it used to be, like maybe 20 years ago. But yeah, if he's not fully healthy yet, that's kind of why he's as low as he is for me. But if he was like 100% healthy, I would have expected him to probably be in like the 20s, like the 30 through 20 range.
Yeah, certainly.
I thought
Um,
LaMelo Ball was like a little bit low on everyone's lists. Like he was an all-star last year, and it kind of has yet to be proven to me whether he's a winning basketball player or just like a fun, good stats, bad team type guy. But I know the Hornets are going to be pretty putrid this year. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm just looking at the East and kind of that whole Miles Bridges situation. I don't know that they're going to have a very good year. I think
yeah,
they're going to,
they're gonna be terrible this year.
I think they're going to be in the Wembanyama sweepstakes. And especially like, I didn't even realize, it didn't even cross my mind when they hired Steve Clifford they had him like a couple years ago. He was the coach, and they fired
Yeah,
him, and then now they
yeah.
they brought him back. So
And less than a year after extending Bortega. Um, yeah, they're gonna be
Borrego,
rough to Borrega, yeah, they're gonna be rough to watch. I'm more than happy if they get the Wembanyama pick because, I
yeah,
mean,
you're living
Matt
there
living
now.
in Charlotte, like,
Yeah.
I'm all for that. Yeah, I have those 23 games this year that I'm going to, and none of them are to see the Hornets, I can tell you that.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's probably fair.
Yeah.
At least for you, like LaMelo is a nice consolation prize. But even on a bad team, I think he's still going to play pretty well. He kind of
Yeah.
seems like he's going to elevate those like less than stellar pieces that the Hornets are going to have to card out there this year. And I think they're kind of set up for a pretty big trade. I know they were interested in Russell Westbrook at one time. I could definitely see them if things get off to a rocky start, like them just clearing house and like using Westbrook as like a tool to get some of those Laker picks and then just kind of kicking him out the door after that. I really do think this could be pretty much it for Westbrook. I think if he finishes the year out with the Lakers, I think he has one more year left in the league. But if he gets traded and bought out, like this will be the last season that we see him.
I don't know if I'd go so far to say that. You might see him bounce around for a year or two.
I really don't
It
think this is what happened to Iverson. This is the exact thing that happened to Iverson, like where he was better than like him being out of the league. Like Iverson was still pretty solid at the end, but he wasn't willing to come off the bench. He wasn't willing to take a lesser role. And so the teams that were bad didn't want him because he was going to help them win games. And the
yeah,
teams that
it's
were good didn't want him because he couldn't fit into like a team system and contribute as a role player. So it kind of leaves him in no man's land. So that's the reason why I think that this kind of could be it for him.
yeah, I mean, if anything, it's not going to be a Westbrook decision to hang up the sneakers.
No, no. I mean, he's got a year or two left, and that's about it, I think.
Yeah, that certainly would be interesting. I mean, Iverson was a All-Star in '09. I think that was his 14th season. I think Russ is about at that point. I don't think he's a nowhere near All-Star caliber by any means.
I did a video on him. Like Russell Westbrook has already lasted longer than Iverson did. But
Yeah,
I did a video comparing their situations, and Iverson went from like a 20 a game score to out of the league the next year. And it's this the stubbornness is why.
yeah,
Did we talk about
yeah.
Darius Garland yet?
Um,
Yeah, we did.
I think we did. He's just yeah, we did. We totally did because we were talking about those bubble 50 guys. At least for the other list, I think he's clearly a top 50 player, and so do you.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess we should probably talk about Kyrie Irving because he's in this range.
yeah,
I have him a lot higher. You had him a lot higher.
yeah,
Um, I think that ESPN and Sports Illustrated are. I talked about this during the Nets preview. I kind of played the other side of this because during media day, Kyrie basically was saying that the only reason people are viewing him as unreliable and kind of flaky is because of the vaccination status thing. And I do agree, at least with respect to this list, that seems to be what's happening. And to his credit, like that vaccination thing in New York, that was just such a weird and backwards rule. Like you could have convinced me that it was designed to specifically target him. I know in actuality, he was just an unfortunate bit of collateral damage because like away players who weren't vaccinated could play. And like if you were having a concert in an indoor arena, like a band who was unvaccinated could play in the arena. So only entertainers that were based in Brooklyn were unable to be indoors for entertainment purposes. I bet it was for like live music at like smaller bars and venues like that. And Kyrie was just unfortunately like became a part of that. But that's not the reason that we view him as flaky. That's not the only
no,
reason.
there's plenty of other reasons for sure. That
So I think if ESPN and Sports Illustrated, they had him a lot higher last year, and now he's a lot lower. And so the only difference is like that vaccination thing from the way that they're viewing him. So yeah, I think he should be higher. I think you can count on between 40 and 50 games. And then if I'm looking at like my list or like the way they have it set up, like would I have rather have 40 or 50 games of Kyrie Irving or like 60 games of CJ McCollum?
I don't think it's even close. I think you take Kyrie.
Right. And that's,
Like,
or like in Sports Illustrated, would you rather have banged up Jamal Murray or, 50, 60 games of Kyrie Irving? Like that's not close to me. So that's the way that I chose to look at it. And that's also the way that I chose to look at Zion, who's like
yeah,
pretty,
me
pretty
too.
low on the ESPN list. But it's like the last time we saw him, he was incredible. And sure, he missed the year last year, but I talked about it during the Pelicans preview. Like, not even peak Shaq years was he putting up 27 a game on 60% shooting. Shaq never
Yeah.
hit that in his best seasons where he was putting up that type of scoring production. So if Zion is 24 a game on that type of efficiency for 50 games, like he's better than 40.
Yeah. Yeah, I have him in my top 25. I have Kyrie at 15 just because you saw what he did when he was allowed to play last year. I mean, he's certainly still a top 25 player.
The reason he was lower for me, he was bad in that Celtics series. Like, he was really bad.
I mean, the Celtics shut everyone down that series.
Yeah,
KD didn't know what to do.
I don't want to overreact like too much to any Nets players from that playoff run. Like they were in those games, and that Boston team, I will maintain that that was the best defensive team I've seen since the '04 Pistons. Like they
Yeah.
were incredible on defense.
Yeah, I mean they shut everyone down on that team. They had no idea what to do with the ball. Um, Katie especially, like he didn't know if a double or even a triple team was coming, what to do with it at that point because they collapsed so fast and
Yeah, that Nets team
ended
was
in a
weird.
sweep.
They were
Yeah.
they were weird. I mean they were running 3 and 4 like small guards out there at a time with Kevin Durant just because they couldn't cobble together 5 guys who could play basketball anymore. So yeah, I didn't want to overreact too much to that. So I have Kyrie at 26. And with that, we'll kind of move into the 30 through 20 range. Um, I guess where should we start here? Am I missing something with Carl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert?
Yeah.
They're
It's
they're a lot higher on the other lists.
yeah, so I really don't know what to say about them. I don't know how they're going to play together. And if they are on the court together all the time, how does that work for them?
I think it
'Cause-
works during the regular season is the answer. I think that's a weird enough team that if you think about the way the league works, like you're playing basically every other night with a travel day in between. So when you're playing a bunch of teams that play small ball and stylistically, like most teams are playing a very similar way. So you don't have time to like game plan and scout and prepare for a team as weird as what the Timberwolves are going to be. So we're going to wake up one day and the Timberwolves are going to be like in the number one seed or like a couple games out. And we're going to be like, what the hell is going on? But
Yeah.
I actually think they are going to finish with a top 4 seed. But I think this kind of all unravels in the playoffs. Like Gobert is really limited offensively. And if they get the France version of Gobert, like maybe that's what Sports Illustrated and ESPN are looking at, like the French national team version, where he's like kind of nasty in the paint, like plays with an attitude, like physical, then sure, I think there's a case for him to be higher. But I've not seen him put that version of himself together in the NBA. So I have him at 30 as like understanding that he's a rim protector and not really a lot else. And then like if you look at the guys I have above him, like would I rather have Drew Holiday or Rudy Gobert? Like I get an elite perimeter defender in Holiday who actually does give me something offensively.
Yeah.
Bradley
Yeah.
Beal, despite having a down year, he's a guy who could win the scoring title. Zion, if we get some, relative version of what he was pre-injury, like that's a lot better than Rudy Gobert. It's like Rudy Gobert being at 30 for me is less of an indictment on Gobert and more of like the league is really talented. Like the guys who are above him are guys who could be the number one option for your team.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we're just gonna have to wait and see how it works. I mean, last year we were hesitant on the Cavs for having 3 7-footers in their starting lineup, and it actually ended up working pretty well. So maybe this works for them too.
Yeah. I think that to kind of keep going on the Gobert train here. So I have Bam like a lot higher than Gobert. And I think I'm the only list that has Bam over Gobert. And I'm really confused by that because Bam, had he played a full slate of games last year, had he not had the thumb injury, he would have been the defensive player of the year. So I'm getting like elite level rim protection, not as good as Gobert, granted. He's like a generational rim protector, but I'm still getting like a really high level of rim protection with Bam. But I'm also getting some passing. I'm getting like 18 points a game on like pretty efficient shooting. I'm getting a guy who can switch onto the perimeter and shut down opposing guards. Bam against guards, they're shooting like 30% field goals against him when he's guarding them on the perimeter. So I just like I don't see how I would ever take Rudy Gobert, who does one thing at a generational level and not a lot else, versus Bam, who fills a lot of different roles on a team. And you still
Yeah,
get like defensive player of the year level defense to anchor.
yeah, I'm definitely higher on Bam. Just the versatility. I think you can't ignore that. I'm looking at ESPN's list right now. So they have three Timberwolves players in the top 25.
That's
Um,
yeah, that's a lot.
yeah,
I mean I'm not that much further off. I have Gobert at 30 and then two Timberwolves players in the top 25, but three, I mean you're talking like a dynastic team at some point
yeah,
if you have three in the top 25.
and two of those are the top 20. They have Gobert at 18 and Cat at 13, which
Yeah,
is
I guess that kind of segues into Towns. I guess what about the playoff run that you saw from the Timberwolves would have led you to believe that Karl Anthony Towns is a top 15 player in the league and ahead of Anthony Davis on the ESPN list?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't be convinced. I For like the last 4 years, it seems like the bursting potential of Cat has made everyone want to put him up there, and self included. I just haven't seen it really at a like consistent level. Um, and now when you add another guy like Gobert into the paint, like just what does that mean for Cat this year? I just don't know how it's going to work. I don't, and I'm only saying that because I don't know what their plans are. Um,
I think it works offensively. Like I do think it's going to work okay. I think in the play and defensively, I understand what they're going to try to do schematically. I think so. Last year, the Timberwolves, like the way they defended the pick and roll is they blitz the ball handler. So now with two big guys, like presumably either Gobert or Towns are probably going to be in 90% of pick and rolls that they're defending as like the guy defending the screener. So now when you blitz the ball handlers, you're still going to have a big man to kind of roam the paint. And I think that's the way that they're going to play it defensively. And then offensively, obviously, Towns, one of, if not the greatest shooting big man of all time. I still would have
yeah,
Dirk. But as far as centers goes, I think it's unquestionably Cat. But defensively, he's just not there. Like
well, he's a little immobile.
he's immobile and he spent a lot of the playoffs in foul trouble just making stupid decisions with how he was fouling guys, just really boneheaded fouls. And I defended him early on because I was just like, okay, like this is a level of passion that we've never really seen out of him. So like it finally looks like he cares. So I'm taking that as I think he'll settle down and figure it out. But he never did settle down and figure it out in that playoff run as far as playing defense without fouling. And to have him above Anthony Edwards, I don't see any way that Anthony Edwards is not the best player on that team.
I would tend to agree with you. I think, especially going into this year, what we know about Ant,
Yeah,
and you have him right above Carl, which I think is appropriate.
yeah. I think Towns just like as an inside out scorer is just elite. The efficiency is there, like everything is
Yeah,
there on paper. I think he gets it figured out a little bit. Gobert is going to kind of clean up a lot of the defensive woes that you have from relying on Towns to anchor the defense. So I mean that's kind of where I'm at with that. So I have him a little higher than like I expected to, but I think especially when you're looking at like Donovan Mitchell, like Mitchell was a traffic cone defensively last season. I expect that'll be a little bit better this year now that he's in like a new and presumably happier situation. DeMar DeRozan, based on last year, I would have had higher, but I think last year was more of an aberration rather than like the new norm. like at age 33 or however old he is. Like I don't think he's all of a sudden like an MVP caliber player or like an all NBA candidate perennially after 4 years of not being that. Like that was
Yeah.
last year was statistically his best year of his career. And I don't know that he can recreate that at his age.
I don't know. With Lonzo being out for, I think it's going to be a while, he might still be able to produce, have the ball in his hand more. I don't know how that's going to work.
He was really good last year. Like
Yeah.
that was he had some really good years in Toronto. And to find a year that was even comparable to his season last year, you have to go back to like the middle of the Toronto stint. So
Yeah.
like
It was, I mean, it was definitely the best he's played in a
I
handful
did,
of years.
I just don't think at his age, like I don't think he's going to be able to have another year like that. I really don't. But
I think it's fair to have him at around
yeah,
the 25 mark.
out of respect to what he does, and I think he's really underrated as a playmaker. That's why I have him over Levine still. Like
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's going to fall off a cliff production wise. Like I think he'll probably be in like the 22 to 25 points a game. I don't think he'll be approaching 30 points a game like he did last year.
Yeah. That's fair.
All right, let's move on to 19 to 10. Um, I guess let's start at the top here. Jimmy Butler, number 17 on ESPN's list. I
I'm
know
sure you had an aneurysm when you saw that one.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I was like, there's no way I'm this much of a Heat homer. Like, there's just no
Yeah.
way. And then I'm looking at the list and I'm like, okay, so we have Trae Young above him. Like, what about last year's playoff series would give you any indication that Trae Young is a better basketball player than Jimmy Butler? We came within like a shot of the finals, and I don't know, maybe we beat the Warriors, maybe not, but like it was a couple inches away. And ESPN's rationale was like it was something like, well, he led the team to the conference finals last year, but was this a one time thing, or is this what we can expect from him kind of going forward? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I guess 2 years ago we were in the finals, and he was like the
Yeah.
only reason we were there. So, like,
Yeah. And
like
almost again this year.
yeah, like what other player like above him or around this range is leading a team full of undrafted like two-way contract guys to a conference finals and then to a finals 2 years ago?
Yeah, especially with, I mean, half of the Heat team was a G League team this past season, like in those December, January days. So
Yeah.
many of the guys were COVID protocols, so like they were all two ways.
Well, like
Um,
most of our rotation is undrafted guys. Like we had from
yeah,
last year's team, we had like PJ Tucker, undrafted, like Caleb Martin, undrafted, Gabe Vincent, undrafted, Max Strus, undrafted. It's just like you go down the list and it's like it's all undrafted guys. And I'm like, okay, so if we just drop Carl Anthony Towns on that team, who's I guess a lot better than Jimmy Butler in ESPN's eyes, like, are they going to be better? Damian Lillard was hurt all of last year. Like, I'd be
yeah.
really interested
And
to hear that case.
I don't know if I'm
Paul,
taking Harden that far ahead of Jimmy Butler either. They have him at 11.
I think Paul George was the one that pissed me off the most. He's played like
Yeah,
40 games his last 2 years, and like, respectfully, like, he has never carried a team to a finals or a conference finals the same way that Jimmy Butler did. Sure, a couple of years ago when Kawhi Leonard went down, he was able to close out that Jazz series and then gave the Suns all they wanted in the conference finals. Yes, I understand that, but he wasn't the one having to carry the team year in and year out.
hmm yeah. I mean, I don't even think it's arguable that Jimmy's in that, you know, 10 to 12 area. I have him at 11. You have him at 10.
Yeah,
Um, I think that's just about that Ja, Jimmy, and Booker ranking right there. I think can go any way. Anytime you want to debate it, I think you can flip those three in any certain way.
I agree. Anthony Davis, I'm slightly higher on than a couple of the lists here. And this kind of goes along with what I just mentioned about Paul George. Like, I'm taking Davis above Paul George because like they both have the injury concerns. So like would I
Yeah,
rather take a chance on Anthony Davis being healthy or Paul George like being healthy? Like assuming their health is both around the same level, which like the numbers say that it is. Like Anthony Davis, despite forgetting how to shoot a basketball last year, like I would just much rather have Davis.
Yeah, and I was even higher just because I'm trying to convince myself he had so long to recover off the past injury.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens when he comes back, because I don't want to ignore what he's been before his injuries. So
I don't think he's 30 yet, which seems insane. I don't think he's turned
I,
30 yet. So like, yeah, I can't.
um,
I find it
no, I
hard
don't
to
think he is.
I find it hard to believe that he, in year, not even having turned 30, that the prime is over. Like he's never going to be a good basketball player again, just because he spent like the last 2 years kind of banged up, really his whole career. But yeah, I don't know. That just seems to have him that low, especially like ESPN, like they have Rudy Gobert over him, and like Paul George. Like Paul George has the same problems. So like, do they think that
Yeah,
Paul George is that much better? The Harden one really took me by surprise because we haven't seen him play like James Harden top 10 level
yeah,
basketball in a long time. And he's blaming it on the hamstring, which may or may not be true, but history tells us that once these score first guys or like these swingmen like Harden, once like their production dips when they're in their 30s, like that's it. It doesn't come back. They don't get that quick first step back. So that's why I have him lower. I think he'll be better this season because it looks like he's going to be in better shape, but we're not getting Houston Rockets James Harden back. And that seems to be what ESPN thinks we're going to have this year.
I don't see it happening. 11's way too high. I think I had him at 18. You had him at 17. We seem to agree there.
Yeah.
And that just seems fair based on who we're putting above him and below him. I mean,
I
it's
don't
not his team anymore. He's not the guy. It's Joel's team. And like we saw in the playoffs, even Maxey was probably better than Harden in the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that that's a true statement. I don't think that Maxey is a better player, but he was better in the playoffs. So
That's what I mean.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm still giving James Harden a certain level of respect, but I don't know. He's gonna have to prove it to me that he's still like an MVP level player. Like I think that's a lot to ask.
I mean, if
Jalen,
you look at this list too, if you look at ESPN's list, the top 10 could easily be an MVP discussion. So if you're putting James Harden right below that, I don't see the connection.
see that's what gets me is like so they're clearly punishing Kawhi Leonard for health reasons.
Yeah.
They're clearly
Well,
punishing Anthony Davis for health reasons. But like Kawhi Leonard missed, last year with an ACL, so presumably he's going to be, back. Paul George I don't think he's played 60 games in the last 4 years of his career. So like, why is Paul George not being dinged for his injury history?
yeah. I thought Kawhi at 12 was blasphemous. I think I don't know if you saw the pictures of him, what he's looking like this year, but he's definitely top 10.
Yeah, Damian Lillard is another one that they don't appear to be like dinging for the injury thing, and I don't think that they should. But like when you're saying that Damian Lillard and Kawhi Leonard are relatively the same players. Like I don't I don't agree. I don't agree at all. And there might be a
Yeah.
huge gap in their mind between 12 and 14, but yeah, I don't see it. And like if Damian Lillard is worse than Carl Anthony Towns, like yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, all right. I'm glad I don't sound as insane as I thought I was in my head when I was making my list because when I was looking at ESPN, I was like, there's just no way any of this is true.
Well, it doesn't. It's not consistent. That's the problem
Yeah,
with it. It's not
yeah,
consistent. Like they're punishing some players for having an injury history and not others, and it doesn't
yeah,
seem to have any rhyme or reason to it. I do want to mention Jalen Brown because he was 22 on ESPN and Sports Illustrated. I had him just below Harden at 18. It's like a pretty big difference between 22 and 18, I would say.
yeah,
Did I,
yeah.
I
We have him flipped with Harden 17 and 18. I had JB at 17. You had him at 18. I had Harden at 18. You had him at
yeah,
17.
I'm not too mad about that. I would still
Yeah,
probably take the upside of like a healthy-ish Harden over Jalen Brown, but like, Brown was really good. He's really good defensively.
yeah,
Catch him on the right night. It wouldn't be if I saw an ESPN like headline or pop up across the bottom of the screen that Jalen Brown had 50. I wouldn't be shocked by that. You know,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, how did he do that? Like, so Bradley Beal, I feel like he's really overrated now on these lists. He really does like nothing but score at this stage, and that's kind of piggybacking off the Jaylen Brown thing. Like, I just don't see a case for Beal over Brown at this stage. You're getting like minimal extra scoring production from Beal, and I think Brown just fills a lot more roles for your team. I think Brown is even a better defensive player than he is an offensive player. So like to get
Yeah.
around the same level of scoring, same level of efficiency around the same level of efficiency, I just much rather have Brown.
Yeah, me too. And I think Beal kind of shot himself in the foot signing, yet another extension, um, in Washington. So, and it's just been so hard to feel sympathy for him when he's on a losing team and looking frustrated with 50 points and they're down by 65.
They're gonna be abominable this year. Like
Yeah.
they've got some good players, but like nothing really fits together. And I never understand what their front office is doing. Like they drafted Johnny Davis, who I guess in like the best case scenario, he looks really bad. Like so far, like he looks like he could be just like a real bust. Like he was terrible in summer league, but even if things kind of pan out for him, like he's around the same size as Beal and kind of operates in the same spaces. So I don't know why you would draft a guy who kind of fills a similar role to the guy you just gave $250 million to.
hmm Yeah. I mean, he definitely deserves what he's getting paid by all means. There's just never any team around him to really make it worth anything.
Yeah, he may still be a trade candidate yet. I mean, from his perspective, like why not just take the super max and then a year from
Yeah,
now
and get
demand a
traded.
trade? Yeah.
That's kind of what I figured the angle was, but I also thought that on his last Supermax extension, I thought he'd be dealt by the end of this one, so who knows?
Yeah, I think they're going to be fighting for a play-in spot. The play-in is attainable for them, but probably not. Probably not going to
Yeah.
happen. They're probably going to be picking at like between like 10 and 13 in the draft again, and that seems to be where they live as an organization. Yeah, I don't know. The Beal thing, he had a really down year last year, like scoring wise, efficiency wise, all of it. If I had rated him based off of that kind of going forward, I'm not even sure that he's in the top 50, but I'm assuming he's going to get back to like in the mix for the scoring title. But even if he is kind of in that mix, high 20s a game, like that's all he's really doing for you. And everybody above him on my list, at least, are guys who can do multiple things. And if you have them on your team, you're probably making the playoffs.
Yeah, if I were to have built my list out a little more, I'd probably have him, that lower 25 to 30 range, probably closer to 30. Um,
I had him at 28
yeah, like that seems fair.
in between Zion and Drew Holiday.
Yeah, looking at the guys that you have above him, I think it's definitely reasonable.
Yeah, and he like so what I mentioned at the very beginning, where I was like, where you feel like you're going to have guys higher on your list than they actually are. He was one of those guys that kept slipping and slipping further down and slipping further down because everybody that I have above him, I'm like, well, I wouldn't take Beal over Zach LaVine at this stage. I wouldn't take Beal over Donovan Mitchell, and like I keep moving him further and further down. So yeah, that's kind of where I landed on him. And he's like a fringe top 10 player for these other lists, which is a little crazy. And that does get us to the top 10 here. So relatively the same top 10s for everyone, minus like I think the top 10 was fairly obvious this year. And I don't think that John Morant is quite a part of it yet. So
Yeah.
you had him in the top 10, so did ESPN. Um,
So my thing was, and I flipped those three, Ja, Butler, and Booker so many times from 10 to 12. I think you can really put them in any order. Um, Situationally, I just kind of like where Ja is with the Grizzlies. I mean, that's not a knock on Butler at all. The age factor, I mean, not like Jimmy's getting older or anything, but Ja is kind of just starting to inch and get better and better, where Jimmy's probably past that part of his career. So looking at the end of next year, I think it's definitely possible.
I think it's definitely possible. And I think that 10 through 12 is pretty close. And then
Yeah,
like I
definitely.
wouldn't inch anybody from like the 13 and beyond. I think there's a pretty big gap between 12 and 13.
Yeah, I would say so
Um,
too.
the reason I have Jimmy over Ja is I have yet to see Ja really prove that he can be a consistent 3-point shooter. Like teams are still kind of sagging off of him, similar to the way they do Jimmy Butler. I get a lot more defensively from Jimmy Butler. Um, I get about as much playmaking. I would even argue that Jimmy's a little bit better as a playmaker. The assist numbers probably don't bear that out, but I think the eye test does. And just the last 3 years for Jimmy Butler, the year that we got swept by the Bucks in the first round, it was Jimmy had an incredible year that season. It was the rest of the team that really let him down. And then you're talking about a finals run and a conference finals run where very easily could have won that game seven and advanced to the final. So the fact that I've seen Jimmy Butler do it before, he's bigger, he's stronger, he's able to defend more positions. Like I value that two-way more than what I'm getting from John Morant. I don't. He hasn't shown me the defensive stuff yet to really kind of to be a top 10 player in the NBA. I think you have to be able to do it on both ends, or if you're not doing it on both ends, you have to be like a transcendent offensive player. And I just don't know that Ja has entered that conversation yet. I think when we do this next year, and I'm projecting into the following season, I would expect I probably have Ja over Jimmy, but I think Jimmy's got one more like top 10 year at least left in him.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you're right about that at all. Um, Before we do the rest of the top 10, did you see the news break? Jordan Poole signs 140 for 4 years.
Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Yeah.
Wow. So
How
the
much of
Warriors
that how much of that was a bonus for getting clocked at practice?
for keeping quiet about that, not pressing
Yeah.
charges. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
probably a little bit of that in there. No, the Warriors like clearly believe in him to the degree that we do, where he's like we see him as a top 50 player already.
They're not
And
going to pay a guy who's the 82nd best player in the league $140 million.
right. Yeah,
That's
just
just absurd.
that is insane. Yeah, that would be absurd to do. I've been kind of beating this drum to death during the previews, like where guys like Tyler Hero and Jordan Poole are getting these massive extensions, but we're going to have guys in the near future making like 70 and $80 million a year.
Oh yeah.
It's
It's definitely headed that way. I
it's
mean, guys
it's
are already in the 50s.
it's happening. Well, the new like media rights deal is getting ready to come through, and the NBA is making money hand over fist right now. So paying a guy like Jordan Poole $30 million at the end of that contract, it's going to seem like a bargain, which is insane to think about. It just sounds like an absurd amount of money, but that's just the way
If you
that the league is going.
if you think about the timeline of it, 2016 when they raised that cap so much, it was crazy to see a guy get 4 years with 30 million a year on a
Yeah,
contract. And now they're
Mozgov
getting in
and
the
yeah, Mozgov and Luol Deng were getting 20 million a year. I think last season was the last year the Lakers were paying Luol Deng.
Yeah, they were paying him till last year. And that was just 6 years ago. Now you're seeing guys where the max is getting them in the 50s a year range.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
the
If you can lock a guy down for 30 million a year right now, like I think you do it. Like,
I
it's
think you do
just
too. Yeah.
it's gonna get crazy.
And that's why I wasn't so upset about seeing the number that Hero got because I was like, it's really not even going to matter in the grand scheme of things 5 years from now. And
Here,
it's probably enough to just lock him up.
here's where I kind of land on like the contract stuff. Like Hero's gonna get 25 million a year from somebody.
Yeah,
So like just to keep the peace and keep like the roster happy, like spend the extra 5 million. Like
totally. Yeah.
there's no reason to play hardball like the Suns did. We've seen them try that route twice. And I think the Joe Johnson thing, they were arguing over $5 million over the course of a 5 year contract. So $1 million a year. That was the sticking point. And
Yeah.
that cost them a chance at a championship. So like the extra $5 million tagged on the end of a contract is just in the Hero case or Poole, somebody was going to give Poole something approaching that at least, if not that exact number. Just
Yeah.
do it. Make them feel the love.
I would have expected 25 to be the floor a year for both of those guys. So I don't think it's really out
Yeah,
of, it's
I think it's
not
fine.
really. Yeah.
It sounds insane, but relative to the economics of the league, it's
Yeah.
like actually fine.
Yeah.
um, So I saw a lot of pushback on ESPN for having Jason Tatum ahead of Kevin Durant. Um, you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I had Kevin Durant still ahead of Tatum. Where did you end
Yeah.
up landing?
I had KD at 7. I had Tatum at 9 with Kawhi at 8. Um, I think 7 is a little too high. I still would like to see more consistency from Tatum. I mean, there's so many games throughout the regular season and playoffs where, he's either 15 for 20 with 40 points, or he's 2 for 20 with a lot of free throw trips, which isn't really a terrible thing if you get the free throws in, but like the shooting consistency is, you can't ignore it. I wouldn't put him above KD just yet. It's probably the last year you could talk about it. Just given Kevin Durant's age and, his injury history and where his team is right now, it's probably the last year that you put KD above Tatum.
I
Um,
agree. I think Sports Illustrated had him, Kevin Durant, way too high, but
yeah,
um, I wasn't as offended by the Tatum over Durant thing. I saw everybody on Twitter kind of freaking out about that when it happened. Durant was pretty bad in that Nets Celtics series, and it wasn't just a case of Tatum overwhelming Durant with like his athleticism.
yeah,
There were large stretches of that series where Al Horford was kind of locking KD up on the perimeter, which so if that's like the version that we're getting of Kevin Durant going forward, where he's like having trouble beating guys off the dribble, like then that's the case. But like you said, I still think that Durant is better. The consistency has been there for, I don't know,
yeah,
12 years now, like where he's
yeah. I
really
mean,
been like all NBA MVP level type guy. And
yeah,
yeah,
it's
I
it's definitely a respect thing. And I mean, Tatum has cooked Kevin Durant the last 3 years. He hasn't been able to guard him at all.
yeah.
The last 3 seasons that they've played head to head. So there's definitely that to it. And I think the most recent playoff series probably factors into that a lot with ESPN. Um, for me, it's just consistency. And it's probably the last year we talk about it anyway. So
it's close. It was
yeah,
really close for me. I mean, just by the slightest of margins, I have Kevin Durant over Jason Tatum. So I didn't really think that that was that big of a deal. Now, Kevin Durant ahead of Joel Embiid, Luka Doncic, LeBron,
yeah,
like on
no,
Sports Illustrated's list, like I had no chance.
no, no, not
Um,
at all.
so I had LeBron at 6. ESPN had him at 6, and Sports Illustrated had him at 7. Where did you end up landing? Did you have Curry over LeBron, like I did?
So I had LeBron at 5. All right, so 3 is Steph, 4 is Embiid, 5 is LeBron, 6 is Doncic.
Okay. Oh, you had Doncic a lot lower than me.
Yeah, I think I had Doncic the lowest. Sports Illustrated had him at 6 as well.
Yeah.
I'm not ready to give Doncic over LeBron. Not ready to do it. I mean, LeBron showed us he's still a freak last year.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
his team was terrible.
Yeah, I didn't want to overreact to the team thing because he
Yeah,
was he was playing center defensively for the Lakers and point guard offensively to try to just keep them afloat. And it was obviously like he could have won the scoring title had he really gone for it there at the end. Like he ended
well,
up,
everything he did last year was better than his career average, except for his assists.
yeah,
And he's what, 38?
yeah, it's insane. So I flipped on. I had Doncic like clearing Curry and LeBron like not convincingly, but like I didn't think about that at all. So I just want to talk about Steph LeBron real quick
Mhm.
before we get into that. This I flipped on this one a lot, but ultimately I thought the Curry effect, the effect that he has on his teammates at this stage in his career still, where he opens up the floor for everyone else. That's just so valuable. And it's hard to rank it within the context of a list like this, because if you're just evaluating him as an individual basketball player and not taking into account the type of gravity he has and the effect he has on his teammates, then he's a lot lower. But you have to consider that for something like this. And the fact that LeBron at this stage, not blaming him at all, in year 20, he just doesn't really play a whole lot of defense anymore. And
Yeah,
that's okay.
yeah,
I would just rather, if my goal is to win games, I would just rather have Curry and that gravity that he still commands than LeBron without any defense.
yeah. I have Steph 2 spots above LeBron, and it's arguable this year that the Warriors are even better than they were last year. So
I think on paper they are, but I think the
yeah,
rest of the conference has made bigger leaps than the Warriors did.
we'll see. I mean, they're adding James Wiseman's going to be back, and he's an absolute freak. So you add that to a championship team,
Yeah,
um, it's going to be good. And I think
they're
we're
gonna be good
definitely
this year. They're gonna be in the mix,
yeah,
but they also I talked about this during the Warriors preview. They had I don't want to put an asterisk by their championships, so don't misinterpret that. You play the team in front of you. They had an excellent finals run, but the Warriors never ran up against anybody in their playoff run that could take advantage of their weaknesses.
hmm
Like Jokic was really the only guy who could kind of exploit them, and he was playing with the Washington Generals last year. So
yeah. The Nuggets really weren't the team that they had been the last couple of years. Um, I mean, Murray's hurt, MPJ's hurt. We never really got to see what he would turn into. Um,
and
so
then
yeah, it wasn't as tough as you'd
and
expected.
then after that, like if they run up into it, if they had ran into like a really good center, even like a DeAndre Ayton, I think they would have had a lot of trouble. They didn't really have an answer for that, but they
But
never
now they're
did.
adding Wiseman if they do run into that.
Yeah, so potentially he could be that. I like we have
Yeah,
yet to see it. I don't want to count him out because he's had as bad of a start to a career as you can have. Like missing basically the entire year of college, and then you enter the league as the starting center on a team with playoff aspirations, with no training camp, no preseason, and like very little practices. So of course he was going to look bad after having taken a year off of basketball. And then last year
yeah,
he's out for the season. So like this is like really the first year where we'll actually get to see what he's going to be.
yeah. And I think he's gonna be special. So you add that to the team. I mean, you're probably gonna see Steph competing for an MVP. Definitely
Okay.
deep playoff run.
Okay.
Because I haven't seen really much of a Steph drop off at
No,
all.
he had a pretty bad year by his standards last year, just shooting numbers wise. But I mean, the effect that he has on opposing defense just can't be understated. And I felt like six was where we saw a drop off, like after LeBron on this list, like the gap between LeBron and Durant at this stage
Yeah,
is
it, it
is more significant than like between 6 and 4 in my mind.
yeah. If you were to tier out this list, I think one and two are absolutely a tier of its own. Giannis and Jokic. Right below them is probably the 3 through 6 range, where it's like Steph, Embiid, LeBron,
I don't agree.
Doncic. Do you think
I
it's closer?
I think it's a 3. I think it's a 3.
You think it
I
goes to 3? I think it ends at 2.
mm-mm. I think if I had been voting, my vote would have been for Embiid last year. But let's do the Doncic thing because you were a little bit low, just real quick, because you were a little bit lower on him. ESPN was very high on him. You were more in
Yeah,
line with Sports Illustrated. So, like last year, he leads his team to the conference finals, and he spent the beginning of the year banged up. He came in out of shape. So the reason I have him where I do is he talked about last season, he's talked about this offseason, the need to kind of get into shape and get his body right. So I'm counting on him coming in like in the best shape he's ever been in his career. And if he's in good shape and is a little bit more committed to defense after like the start of that Sun series where they were just kind of picking on him, he really picked it up defensively. So if he took that lesson combined with the like let's get into shape lesson, I would not be surprised to see him win MVP. He wouldn't be my favorite. I think they're going to give it to Joel this year, but I would put him second in MVP voting.
yeah. I wouldn't be surprised either. And what it really comes down to is the conversation we started off with, and that's just how good the league is right now. Because it seems like a diss to have Luka outside the top 5, but
Yeah.
the players are just that good. That's kind of just how it is. And I wouldn't be surprised if he shuts me up and is better than LeBron this year, and he probably takes into a top 5 spot. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
See,
I'm
I
just not
can.
ready to admit it.
Yeah, yeah, that might be the issue that we might be not be ready to live in that world yet. But
Yeah.
I just think if LeBron, like, given that LeBron isn't really playing a lot of defense at this stage, like, what is Luka doing, like, drastically worse offensively than LeBron? It's like not a lot at this stage. I think Luka as a shot creator at this stage is just I think he's a higher caliber shot creator. Maybe the assist stuff, the playmaking isn't quite as good with Doncic as it is LeBron at this stage, but if Luka's in shape and is more committed on the defensive end, like I think he could be,
Yeah.
that's what catapults him ahead of LeBron for me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and it certainly wouldn't surprise me. I'm probably going to be proved wrong, and that's fine. Like I said, it's probably more just me not being ready to admit that.
Yeah. So top three, I think everyone and their grandmother has Giannis as number one. I don't think
Yeah.
there's really any debate for that at this stage. He was incredible last year. He's been incredible the last few years. Like he's really the evolutionary version of Shaq. Like
Yeah.
just like the modern day version of Shaq. Just unstoppable in the paint, and he's still improving every year, which is kind of the scary part. He's still adding things to his game. I actually do think he's a little bit overrated as a perimeter defender, but like he's a all-time rim protector.
Well,
So
it's okay to get blown by when your arms are 9 feet long. You
yeah,
can just make
yeah,
up for it.
he almost doesn't have to be that good, like
Yeah.
moving laterally. So
It's kind of the same with Gobert. Like if a little guard is going to blow by you, you just got to take 2 steps and you're right back into the defense. So
yeah, and then back-to-back MVP Nikola Jokic. I don't know that we've ever seen or ever will see another player like him. Just his play style is so unique and can't be taught. But what he did with the Nuggets last year, I know I said I would have had Joel Embiid as the MVP last season. I wasn't mad about the Jokic thing at all. He deserved it as well.
yeah,
He
there
was
was not a wrong choice between those two.
he was playing with a bunch of G League guys. Like they were bad. Like if you go back and if you look at the guys who played like significant minutes for that Nuggets team, you're looking at Aaron Gordon, Will Barton, and like Jeff Green are in like the top 5 for minutes last season. It's
Yeah,
like
that's pretty tough.
what other player is getting you to a 6 seed in the West with like a bunch of G League guys or
Yeah, and that's a big thing because a lot of people were probably like, "Why are you giving the MVP to a 6 seed?" Well, it's like, look who's on the team. Like, look who he made a 6 seed. It's
right.
not really like they struggled. It's just because look who they had to play with.
Well, record wise, there wasn't like a huge gap between the 76ers and the Nuggets. Like if you go back and look at the standings, I don't think it was more than 5 games. Like they were pretty close record wise. So the 6 seed thing was a little bit overblown. And when you're talking about a 6 seed versus a 4 seed, like, But the reason I would have given it to Embiid is like we've not seen a big guy put up these types of numbers since Shaq, like a
Yeah,
center, and just navigating the whole Ben Simmons thing, where like your second best player on your team essentially just vanishes like Thanos snapped off the face of the earth and you're having to kind of pick up the pieces. And the fact that he got them to a 4 seed, and then you're adding halfway through the year, James Harden, who's probably, if not the hardest guy to integrate into a new team, definitely in the top 5, just with his play style. Like you kind of have to design a system around him so to add a piece like that on the fly and still make it work. Like that was what kind of pushed it ahead for me. So yeah, I see this as a 3-man like top 3. I think Embiid, because what he brings to the table defensively, I think is in the conversation. I think he's in the same tier as Giannis and Jokic. Not as good, obviously, because I have him at 3, but I think he's at least in the conversation there.
yeah. It's really not a very controversial top 10 this year.
ESPN disagrees with you.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's hard to agree with anything that ESPN puts out is the problem. Like when you said I align more with Sports Illustrated than ESPN, it was almost a compliment.
Yeah. Sports Illustrated, their top 10. I mean, it was the exact same as mine, just like minus the Durant thing, which I think they're way too high on Durant, but like
Yeah.
just different order. Like I wasn't too offended by that, and that was kind of how I felt overall about Sports Illustrated. I was like far less offended. Like I had more disagreements, I think, but they were far less offensive than the ones with ESPN.
Yeah. If you're just talking about flipping 1 or 2 guys between spots or maybe rotating a segment of 3 players, like it's really not far off from what we have.
No, and when I could make a case for guys being ahead of other guys, like for ESPN, I can make a case for Kawhi being ahead of Jason Tatum.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Like
mean,
that's what I'm saying. Like
I
all
may
these
not
players, you can make a
agree.
case for them to
Yeah,
flip. Like,
yeah. Yeah, but the league is just insane now. I mean, the
Mhm.
fact that like Van Vliet, we didn't talk about, but he was in like the 40s for me. He was an all-star last year. And like I was like, oh well, he was an all-star. When I sat down to make the list, I'm like, I'll probably have him in like the 30s. And then you sit down and you actually make the list, and you're like, keep moving him down and moving him down and moving him down. It's like Lee's just super talented, and
Yeah,
this year's draft class, like coming up, it's gonna be more of the same. We're just gonna be looking at the league is in really good hands for the next, I don't know, 10 years.
yeah. I even when you say a top 10 player, that means a lot more than it used to. Um,
Even
just
more than it
because,
did last year. Because I think
yeah,
we
it seems
we
like it.
we kind of put Damian Lillard in there, like
Yeah,
just because we were like, who else is going to be in there? But like now, it was like tough to crack the top 10. It was tough to crack the top 20. It was
yeah,
I thought the top 30 was like there's some really good players down there like who weren't able to even crack the top 30.
yeah. It's pretty insane the talent right now. And yeah, it's only gonna get better.